The Cartagena enterprise maintained discipline, suppressed dissent, and enforced loyalty through a persistent and calculated use of violence. This violence was not random. It was strategic, directed, and often premeditated. Defendant Cartagena regularly issued orders that resulted in seriously bodily harm or death. I told y'all a murder in here. Using surrogates and coded language to insulate himself while asserting dominance across the enterprise. And, yo, if you think this ain't going criminal, you bumping. Examples of enforcement violence include Miami incident, teenagers ordered to attack. In Miami, defendant Fat Joe ordered 2 teenage boys to assault a man who had inadvertently walked through a group of affiliates with the enterprise. The man, armed in self-defense, fatally shot both teens. Their deaths were a foreseeable outcome of the defendant's coercive leadership style, which normalized confrontation and violence as acceptable forms of conflict resolution and loyalty enforcement. So are they saying that he told some young niggas to step to somebody and that nigga pulled the gun out and killed them? Allegedly? That's what is teenagers ordered to attack. In Miami, the defendant ordered 2 teenage boys to assault a man who had inadvertently walked through a group of affiliates with the enterprise. The man, armed in self-defense, fatally shot both teens. Wow. Somebody in Miami gonna know this story. Somebody in Miami is gonna know this story and they're gonna be reporting on it in 5 seconds. Cafe Ketchup and Sing Sing events. The enterprise coined the phrase "cafe ketchup" to reference a retaliatory stabbing that occurred after an altercation involving the enterprise member JB. Another incident involved a murder for which I told y'all was murders. That was redacted. Another incident involved a murder for which, according to the defendant's admission, another individual is now serving a life sentence in Sing Sing Correctional Facility, a conviction the defendant has openly mocked, boasting that they could have pinned that on me. They could never pin it on me. Oh, this is getting worse, bro. This is getting worse. Defendant Cartagena repeatedly glorified violence and normalized its use by embedding it in coded language. Within the enterprise, phrases like pound him out, physical assault, matandin, kill him, and ketchup, stab, slash, were understood as direct commands to act violently. These coded terms allowed the defendant to direct attacks while concealing his role from outside scrutiny and law enforcement. If they going through these dudes' phones and any of these words is in there to certain people, somebody getting ready to get life. Recorded retaliation attempts against the plaintiff. After the plaintiff begins publicly speaking out about the enterprise's misconduct, senior members Pistol Pete and Rich Player initiated a targeted plan to lure the plaintiff into a violent trap. Their actions were premeditated and recorded in a series of calls and mutual associate of calls to a mutual associate, Percy, whom they sought to use as bait. During the calls, Pistol Pete and Rich the Player referred to the plaintiff, T.A. the Legend, as a traitor, cited defendant Fat Joe's outrage over T.A.'s disclosure and made it clear that T.A. had to be dealt with. They pressed Percy to help coordinate an in-person meeting under the pretenses expressing that the situation had escalated too far to fix. These recorded calls illustrate the organized and retaliatory nature of the enterprise's enforcement practices. The use of coded threats such as pound them out and bring them in, was consistent with the other acts of violence and intimidation carried out under the defendant's command. These efforts to silence T.A. the Legend constitute witness intimidation and obstruction of justice in violation of 18 U.S.C. and qualify as racketeering acts under 18 U.S.C. 1961 1B. They also support the T.A.'s claim of unlawful retaliation under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, specifically 18 U.S.C. 1591D. Illicit communications and burner phone use. In furtherance of the enterprise unlawful objectives, the defendant Cartagena maintained a burner phone ending in 1330, which T.A. personally observed and used. The phone was kept separate from the defendant's public devices and reserved for high-risk enterprise-related communications. Defendant used his burner phone to communicate with underage girls and arrange secret meetings in advance of out-of-town trips, performances, or hotel stays. Coordinated trafficking logistics with known enforcers, including Pistol Pete and Rich the Player. Issued sensitive directives related to violence, retaliation, and enforcement while avoiding traceability. The defendant routinely replaced the burner device every few months, and it was used known only to a select group of trusted insiders. The secrecy surrounding this phone is its patterns of use and its intentional separation from the defendant's official communication channels demonstrate a deliberate effort to evade law enforcement surveillance and obstruct future investigations. The use of the burner phones and coded communications is consistent with the operational tactics of RICO Enterprises. It supports plaintiffs' allegations that the Cartagena Enterprises function with the intent, coordination, and concealment necessary to sustain illegal operations over a prolonged period. Prior conviction confirms enterprise knowledge and intent. Defendant Cartagena's prior federal tax conviction is highly probative of the enterprise's operational knowledge, and intent. On and or about December 20th, 2012, in the U.S. District Court for the District of New Jersey, the defendant pleaded guilty to 2 counts of willfully failing to file income tax returns in violation of 26 U.S.C. 7203. According to publicly available records, including court filings and the Department of Justice releases, one, the defendant earned over $3.7 million between 2007 and 2010 through the Terror Squad Productions, Miramar Music Touring, and Fat Joe Terror Squad Corporation, which is FJTS. He failed to file a tax return for multiple years and took no action to correct his obligation until criminally charged. The defendant was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison, fined $15,000, in order to repay $718,038 in back taxes. This conviction confirms that the defendant's knowledge of federal reporting laws demonstrates his willingness to engage in concealment schemes to protect enterprise revenue. A lot of this stuff is repetitive. Causes of action, violation of Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA. The plaintiff repeats and realleges all preceding paragraphs as through fully set forth herein. Legal standard. All this is repeated. Using the threats of force or harm, restraint, repeated. Using serious harm or threats, repeated. Without compensation or royalties. Yeah, all this stuff is all this is repeated in the earlier parts.